Ciao, what's poppin' YouTube? Today we are going to be taking a peek at one of the most influential classic horror books ever written, Dracula. This book is a banger. I first read this when I was about 12, and I understood it and really enjoyed it despite this thing being like 100 years old. I'm actually not sure how old Dracula is. I recently looked at it again, and I have to admit that I forgot Arthur Holmwood even existed. I forgot an entire character, major character, was even in this book, which is either a referendum on my memory or this book, so let's find out which. This book opens up on Jonathan Harker. He's a filthy, blood-sucking lawyer, and he's travelling over to Transylvania to see a wealthy old client of his called Count Dracula. On the way, he gets warned by the locals about all this spooky shit that goes down over at Castle Dracula. People keep giving him garlic and crucifixes, but Johnny Boy shows up at the castle and meets Count Dracula. He's this old man with white hair and a bushy white moustache, so about as far from Bela Lugosi as you could possibly get. Count Dracula basically wants to move to England for some reason, and he needs Jonathan to iron out the details. I'm on the very edge of my seat. Anyway, it soon becomes apparent to Johnny that something's not right with this whole Dracula situation. He sees Dracula crawling down the walls like Toad from the first X-Men movie, and there is this whole troop of gypsies that just live on the premises 24/7. One night, Johnny is out looking around the castle when he gets jumped by a harem of beautiful women. They're about to, kill him when Dracula comes and beats them up and insists that Johnny is his. Johnny realises he's got a GTFO, and so he passes a note to the gypsies, but oh no, they give it right to Dracula because they're obviously working for him. Anyway, one day he's had enough, and he hatches a cheeky plan to scale down the walls and make a run for civilization, and that's the last we hear from him for a bit. So we cut to England, where Mina, Jonathan's fiancée, is talking with her friend Lucy. Lucy's a bit of a bimbo, and so she's got 3 men pining after her. Some nerd called Seward, who's a psychiatrist, the guy I forgot that was in this book, Arthur Holmwood, and Quincy Morris, the ultimate Yankee gigachad. Quincy is basically what Bram Stoker thought of Americans. He's a gun-loving cowboy and is hands down the best character in this thing. Anyway, Lucy picks Arthur for some reason. I don't remember anything about his character, so I don't know, maybe he had the most money, I don't know. Anyway, everyone's really cool about it, and they're all still friends. You can tell this is a fantasy story. But that's when disaster strikes. A boat crashes on the shore, and all that survives is a bunch of Transylvanian dirt and one massive wolf. Shortly after this whole incident, Lucy gets really sick and starts sleepwalking everywhere. She also gets 2 conspicuous bite marks on her neck. Seward immediately calls in his old mentor, Van Helsing, who is this Dutch vampire hunter. Van Helsing comes over and is basically like, yeah, this is a vampire, so he fills Lucy's room with garlic, and it seems to be fine for quite a bit. Mina then hears that Jonathan has popped up in Budapest, and so she goes off to marry him. While she's on that fun journey, Lucy's mum decides that she's going to, remove all the garlic from the room, and then the big wolf shows up and kills them both. Yeah, Dracula's really doing that. He is just killing English women left and right. So anyway, with Lucy dead, she shows up again a few days later molesting kids at a graveyard. And so Van Helsing realises that she is, she's definitely vampire, 100% vampire confirmed. Side note here, Van Helsing does make frequent trips back to Amsterdam throughout this whole thing. I wonder what he's up to. But he's, this absolutely wisecracking, lovable Dutchman who speaks in what I think Bram Stoker thinks is realistic broken English, but it just comes off as complete nonsense words. I don't know how any editor didn't pick up on the fact that, what Van Helsing says 90% of the time makes absolutely no sense, and it's not at all how someone whose second language is English would actually speak. But, whatever. So Van Helsing kills Lucy Vampire and explains what a vampire is. Basically, they're undead, but they have a ton of drawbacks. Sunlight is not one of them, though. That was in the film Nosferatu, which was actually supposed to be a Dracula film, but they didn't get the license and they made it anyway, so they just changed all the names slightly, but I digress. Van Helsing says that vampires need dirt from their homeland, and that's why Dracula brought so much dirt with him. Among other things they can and can't do, they can't cross running water, they're weakened during the day, don't die in the day, weakened during the day, and they can only enter an abode after being invited in. Anyway, Jonathan and Mina come back, happily married, and the gang go to hang out at Seward's asylum. Sure. There's this crazy dude who lives there called Renfield, who's completely obsessed with Dracula. Dracula hypnotizes him and uses him to get inside the asylum, and he begins the process of turning Mina into a vampire. When the gang realizes this, they decide it's time to deport Dracula back to Transylvania, and unfortunately though, Dracula does finish the job, and if Mina dies, she's now a vampire. So Van Helsing and the gang head off to his house to go and perform a little home invasion. They destroy most of his dirt, and then when Dracula comes home with the shopping, they just jump him. Like, they just straight up try to shank him. Dracula fights them off and decides England really isn't for him, and so he decides to go back to Transylvania. It's funny, isn't it, how art imitates life. Dracula experiences an average night in London, and was just like, you know what, fuck it, I'm out. There's way less crime in Transylvania, so see ya. So anyway, he scampers back off to Transylvania with his last pot of dirt, and the Mystery Inc. gang chase after him. Van Helsing goes to Castle Dracula, kills the harem, and purifies that with holy wafers, and then it all comes down to the ultimate showdown. This is the ultimate showdown, ultimate destiny. Dracula and his army of gypsies are going back to Castle Dracula when the squad jump them. I don't quite know why, because he can't even go into Castle Dracula anymore because of what Van Helsing did to it, but whatever, we need a final showdown. So anyway, there's a big fight with the gypsies, and right before the sun goes down and Dracula gains all his powers, Johnny and Quincy manage to stab him in the heart and cut his head off, killing him. The gypsies run off at this, but unfortunately Quincy did take a hit and dies. A moment of silence for our fallen hero. Anyway, Dracula dies and they all live happily ever after, and Johnny and Mina even have a kid and call him Quincy. So, the legacy of the American Giga Chad continues. And that's Dracula. It's pretty sick. It reads remarkably well for a 100-year-old book, and it's not even that racist, so it's a step up from H.P. Lovecraft. The whole thing is written like a collection of journals, newspaper clippings, diaries and stuff like that, which is actually pretty common for back then. Lots of books would be written as if you'd found all this found documents that told you the story, as if, you know, it was in real life. I'm actually surprised that there's never been a found footage version of Dracula done. I'm sure someone can make some good money out of that. Just put my name in the credits. But yeah, it's relatively thematically simple. It touches on themes such as the woes of immortality, as Dracula is fundamentally quite weak despite making a pact with evil for phenomenal powers. But it basically boils down to a normal struggle of good versus evil, with very little meat to dig into past that, which is fine. The book was written to entertain, and it really succeeds. It spawned the entire vampire mythos, basically, and is still very popular to this day. But that is still a bit questionable. The Dracula of pop culture is just a name and some fangs. Really, at the end of the day, this book did terribly in Stoker's lifetime, and the Dracula everyone thinks of is actually the Hollywood Dracula. That's where the look comes from. That's where a lot of the tropes associated with Dracula actually come from. So this book has been Frankensteined quite a bit into the modern day vampire that we know and love or hate. But it's better than Twilight, so... And if you want to read any more books that have vampires in them, you can check out my book, All Hail the Carrion King. There are vampires in it. Vaguely relevant chill.